October 1997 session here of our Minnesota Fire Protection Council. One thing we failed to do at last month's meeting that we're definitely going to do at this month's meeting, which has been a tradition, which I kind of broke last month. I broke a few traditions last month, as I'd like everyone to stand up and introduce themselves, who they are, who they work for. And at the same time, if you have any type of announcements or information to the council that would be beneficial to everyone, you can say it at that time. In regards to notices like that, what we'd like to do is if anyone or any firm has any type of announcements or notices or seminars or anything special coming up, which would be of interest to our members, if they could call me or fax me a note, you can see me after the meeting, and what we could do is review it at that time. If you have any type of pass outs or something you'd like announced at the meeting, please let me know to make sure that the news gets to everyone. So if we can start with Steve over here at this table.
Steve Zacher, St. Paul Fire Department.
Marilyn Arman, Maple Grove Fire Department. Mary Nonbar, State Fire Marshal Division.
Mike Richards, Erickson Ellison and Associates.
Jim Art, Erickson Ellison Engineers.
Jim Brown, Viking Automatic Sprinkler.
Dale Lynn, Viking Automatic Sprinkler.
Jim Kemple, Midwest Fire Protection.
Jim Meyer, Grinnell Fire Protection.
Tom Miller, Viking Automatic Sprinkler Company.
Paul Rivers with 3M.
Bill Calder, Robbinsdale Fire Department.
Pete Rosak, North Memorial Healthcare. Tom Ansel, Fishshot Cooley Erickson.
Gordy Bates, Minneapolis Fire Department.
Chris Leo, Mountain Star Group Incorporated.
Bob Cummings, Mountain Star Group. I'm their Northeast Office Manager. I'm here from New England chapter of SCP.
Weaver, retired.
Kirby Kiefer, Fire EMS Center, Metropolitan State University.
Steve Walter, Industrial Risk Insurance.
Dave Brotman with the St. Paul Companies.
David Holy, NUMEC Companies.
Tony Martino, retired from Cargill, now working for American Risk Consulting.
Brian Grittner, Little Canada Fire Department.
Ed Meyer, my tag says Fire Pro, although we did change that recently. We changed it to Northern Fire Protection Design and Consulting. I know it's a little long, but that way we didn't have to fight with the guy that thought Fire Pro was his name.
That's right on the East Coast.
Even in Boston,
Yeah.
I'm Paul Holy, also with Northern Fire Protection Systems and Design.
I'm Phil Ocker with Futrell Fire Consultants Design Incorporated. Thank you. Thanks for that PSA announcement there, Ed. Northern Fire. We don't have a lot of announcements this month. This is just my second meeting as chapter president, so the mailings that are being switched over to interim are starting to trickle in to where I'm going to be getting more and more of this information out finally. A couple things I do have is I've got some information for SFP regional planning meetings, the one for the NFPA fall meeting in Kansas City, Missouri. It's on Monday, November 17th from 10 a.m. to noon at the Westin Hotel. If anybody needs any information on this, please contact myself after the meeting. I've got some information right here.
Or do they have empty motel rooms?
Pardon me?
Or do they have empty motel rooms?
You can start with the Westin. I've got a number here for you. Okay. And Dave, we're not going to let you go in and come in unannounced, Dave.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Dave Clark with Response Fire Protection.
Okay, at least we're not saying you have to buy donuts at the next meeting. One more announcement that I have. I have applications here for the Society of Fire Protection Engineers invitation to membership with information in regards to the society. If anybody's interested in obtaining one of these applications to become a member, please contact me or come up and see me after the meeting. Got a few here. They're free to give out. One more item. I guess I kind of saw there was a recent NBC Sunday night movie called Terminal not too long ago. It had a chase scene where a bad guy fired a shot and had a fire sprinkler head in a hospital basement. course, you know what happens when the result was that every head in the basement went off. And NBC has done this in the past before. They aired a sitcom that had a similar scene to it also. There was also, I believe, a MacGyver episode at one time or another. It had something similar to one sprinkler head was lit off. And of course, they all went. And if you want to set the record straight with NBC, write to them and tell them the facts. They're spreading myths and misconceptions, and this makes educating the general public difficult as what their community is going to agree with this. One last little item they have in regards to this, maybe this pertains to these people at the networks. A great many people think they're thinking, let me start this out again. A great many people think they're thinking when they're merely rearranging their prejudices. I think that's what's happening with some of these people at the networks. I'd like to call David to give us a short treasurer's report on what's in the checkbook. I warned him prior to the meeting, so he's got some information for us, I know.
Well, I think just announce that currently we have $1,291 in the checkbook, and appreciate all those who paid the dues. And coming up then for January 98 would be the next fiscal year, and I know we already have there's about 4 or 5 people who have already paid for the 98 dues as well. So that's all. That's better than last year.
Slowly gaining momentum. One other item that I had in regards to future seminars, next month's seminar will be by Central Sprinkler Corporation. They'll be coming in to talk about the new technologies and fire sprinkler heads, and just when we think we've seen it all and what can be done with fire sprinklers, up comes Central with a new wrinkle. So that will be at next month's meeting here at the Lido Cafe. And tentatively who we have set up for that is Kevin Maughan. Kevin can't make it, Jim Bernetti will be conducting the seminar. Although I told them to get their boss, Doug Rice, who's the Vice President of Marketing here. This is as much Central products that he probably sells in the Twin Cities area. He ought to get here for this one. Also coming up next few months, we're trying to arrange a wine and cheese social Christmas party to be held here, which is going to be an informal meeting. We haven't tried this before, but we'd like to get some of the membership here on a more social basis other than social hour, and social hour gets cut short a lot of times because of traffic to get here right after work, so we're going to try that. We also have the state, John this year with the state is going to be coming to talk about design and installation limitations of fire sprinklers and some of the things that he's seen and heard about out there, because you'd be surprised, because I've seen some of them too. It's quite surprising what's going on out there. We also have a fire detection demonstration seminar coming up that's going to be on site. We're at a local distributor. We will actually see how they're tested and how they operate. We also have a seminar coming up on water mist technology this year. And we're also trying to plan another on-site visit. This one, I know it's probably not the latest and state-of-the-art technology, but if you don't see it before they tear the place down, we may as well look at it. We're trying to arrange a Metrodome fire management systems along with the Twins game to go with it. It depends if the Twins are still here at the same time. So stay tuned. I'll get right into our program right now. As most of you have seen the flyers that we have, our program is on juvenile arson, Minnesota's preventable crime. Our speakers tonight, I've got their credentials right here, their bios, and they're pretty impressive. One of our speakers, Ms. Mary Nachbar. Mary began her career in the fire service in 1977 as a firefighter with Minnetonka Minnesota Fire Department. In 1985, Mary was promoted to fire marshal in Minnetonka. In 89, Mary became a member of the Minnesota State Fire Marshal Division, and today Mary is the Bureau Chief of the division with responsibilities for fire protection regulation, code specialties, plan review, data analysis, and public education. Mary's background includes 20 years of experience in firefighting, code enforcement, fire investigation, hazardous materials response, data analysis, and public education. Mary was recently elected to the NFPA Board of Directors in 1996. NFPA is an international organization with 60,000 members worldwide, as most of you may know. And Mary believes that knowledge is free, and what you don't know can hurt you. Our other speaker tonight is Ms. Marilyn Arlen, who's Deputy Fire Marshal with Maple Grove Fire Department. Marilyn's fire inspector and public fire educator beginning in 1987. She's been a Deputy Fire Marshal there since 1992. Marilyn holds an associate degree in marketing management, associate degree in fire protection, certificate in fire technology. She's certified fire inspector through ICBO and IFCI. She's certified Fire Inspector 3 through Minnesota Fire Service Certification Board. Boy, it goes on and on and on, Marilyn. Marilyn established the Maple Grove Juvenile Fire Setters Intervention Commission in 1988. The program has grown to include 18 juvenile intervention commissioners for firefighters, full-time staff, and community volunteers, to which I'm one of the community volunteers in the city of Maple Grove. And that's how I became interested in this program and learned more about it. Both Marilyn and Mary are past recipients of the Minnesota Fire Safety Educator of the Year Awards. So it's, I'd say with a lot of fanfare, I'd like to introduce our speakers for tonight. Mary, would you like to start?
Thank you. Thank you. We've got a lot of information. We're going to be hard-hitting and fast, and Marilyn and I will be going back and forth between the two of us. I do have copies of my overheads because there's going to be a lot of data that I'm going to talk about in the beginning, and this will help you so you don't have to write notes. You know you can take the stuff home with you. We'll keep it informal. If you have questions as we go, I would encourage you to just raise your hand and ask your question. One of the things I discovered when I became a firefighter back in 1977 was that the fire department where I came from, and largely the fire departments of the state of Minnesota, had just about one of everything that it took to put a fire out. We had engines, we had ladders, we had hoses, we had axes, all those wonderful things you take for fires. We had all the proper protective equipment and everything we needed, okay? And one thing I discovered as we were going along in this fire prevention mode, supposedly at that time, was even all the equipment that we had, the gong would ring and we would discover that we could not stop fires at that level. Has any of you ever felt that or known that or seen anything like that? Well, part of the reason that I decided to get into public education as a young firefighter was that I discovered the magic secret to the fire problem out there. And the magic secret is there are 3 major causes of fire, simply 3 major causes of fire in my city, in the state of Minnesota, in the United States. Can anybody tell me what they think those 3 causes are? What causes fires? People. Okay? You're right. 3 major causes of fire, not in any order: men, women, and children. Okay? Consider this. It's not a cigarette that falls asleep while being smoked. It's not a chimney that decides not to have itself cleaned. It is people. The whole problem in regard to fire out there boils down to those 3 issues. People causing fires. Well, if people cause fires, who can prevent fires? People. And that's why public education and prevention is one of the strongest things that we have in the fire service to help us with this heinous problem. Now, part of my role in the State Fire Marshal's office is keeper of the data. And this is going to be a little difficult for some to see, so rearrange yourself if you have to. I want to give you an overview of the extent of the fire problem in the state of Minnesota. We process annually about 141,000 incident reports in the State Fire Marshal's office. And with that, $144 million in property loss burns up in the state of Minnesota every year. This is severely understated in that we are just getting what the first blush of that loss is from the firefighter on the scene after they get back to the fire station. So what usually comes out of that is higher dollar losses once the insurance company gets out there. Last year we had a 12% increase in the dollar losses. This has been going up at the rate of about 12 to 15% for the last 5 years. So as we continue on, we are having more and more property loss. There is one fire for every 366 households in the state of Minnesota every year. One for every 366 households. Consider how that equates to the community where you live. Could your home be that one in 366 fires? Could it be your neighbors? Could it be your parent? Whoever. And in one of every 60 house fires, there was a loss of life in the state of Minnesota. That's the significant thing in regard to fire that I have to report to you today. That fires are killing people. They continue to kill people. Although we have made some strides going down, we're not where we should be. Arson burns up $22 million worth of property every year, which is significant when you consider that that equates to about 895 structure fires in the state. So when we have an arson fire, it's more complex, more property burns, and we have a bigger problem. Fire setting alone, and what we're going to be talking about is arson and children who set fires. Children are responsible for $5 million annually in property loss in the state of Minnesota. And we're not talking teenage kids. On average, when we take a look at the data, these are kids that are 8 and under. 8 and under in your communities who are getting a hold of matches and lighters and causing fires. I'm going to talk a little bit about the national arson problem from the big perspective, then we're going to bring it down. Approximately 25% of all fire deaths that occur every year are a direct result of arson. That's somebody purposely setting fire to a structure. And it's the second most common cause of residential fire deaths behind careless smoking, and it is fast becoming the leading cause of dollar loss, leading cause of fires, and the leading cause of deaths in the nation. It's the #1 cause of death and injury in commercial properties. There are listed over 500,000 fires attributable to arson annually in the United States. And 20% of those are in structures, and about 62,000 are in residential property. Where people feel safest, they are in most danger from fire in residential property, and that's across the board. $3.6 billion in loss annually in the United States, and that's 28% of all property loss in the U.S. That equates to $9 million a day. Think of that. In the in the United States of America, this day that will be ending in a couple hours, $9 million worth of property will be destroyed. Lives will be lost. People will be put at risk. The NFPA says there's the rate per 100,000 population is 52 people nationally. In the state of Minnesota, the average rate per 100,000 is 59 people. We're not that much better than the rest of the country when we're talking about that. And surprising to me was the peak time of day when arsons start, and that's at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And guess what? A lot of those are in regard to young children being home, or young children who have access to matches and lighters. Arson vehicle fires are also on the rise, and we're seeing that steadily over the last several years in the state of Minnesota. A couple other issues. When we talk about national statistics in regard to young children, it's almost $300 million in loss every year. 700 to 900 deaths, and of every 100 people who die in a child set fire, 60 are 5 years old or younger. 5 years old or younger. Think of what that means. Okay? 55% of the arson arrestees in the United States of America, according to the FBI, are kids under the age of 18. Who's involved with these fires? Kids. Now, we also know that kids are a little bit easier to catch, but that's not saying much for the rest of the world when we can't catch arsonists in the United States. 7% of those kids are under the age of 10. This age is going down every year as we go along. And it said in the report that I read that this level of preteen involvement is unheard of for any crime that is tracked by the FBI. It's getting to be the crime of choice. We will see gang involvement come more and more into play, where they're using revenge in the form of Molotov cocktails and intimidation to kill people and destroy property. And we are in the process of conducting a study in the state of Minnesota from a grant that we received that will bear that out.
Gary,
Yes?
question, is that the main reason for the increase? You were talking about a 12% increase early on, but that's more than the rate of inflation on an annual basis. Is that the reason for the increase? Primarily the reason is arson?
No. Although it's the second leading cause of dollar loss in the United States, or in the state of Minnesota, the 12% increase is across the board in every cause area. So although arson is increasing annually, the others are also increasing, even though the numbers sometimes are going down. 84% of those arrested for arson that are juveniles are male. Yes?
Is an accidental fire started by a child considered an arson?
We do not have those in this group of data. If it's a curiosity set fire where kids are playing with matches and lighters, that does not get coded as an arson fire. So we can add that to the dollar loss and the numbers in the states.
There is that young person set of fire.
Yes, down to 18 months. I could tell you horror stories about that. 55% of all school fires are set by juveniles, and it's estimated that only 10% of fires that are ever occurring that children are setting out there are ever reported to any authority. That means what? The kids out there on the streets or in homes are doing a lot more than they're getting caught doing. Without intervention, it is said that 81% of these kids will repeat their behavior. 81% will repeat the behavior. And they look at fire now as the gateway to more serious crimes. When children are identified as starting fires and there's no intervention, this is putting a child at risk to go on the road to even worse crimes in the future. These are all national statistics that just came out of a report from Phil Shaman, who's the Tri-Data person in Washington, D.C., who does all the studies comparing the United States with the rest of the world. Minnesota. Let's take a look at what's happening here. Bring this down to a finer detail. $25 million in loss from 89 to 96. 30 fire deaths, and this year so far, we can add another 7 to that list. 220 injuries, about 4,400 incidents, and again, in Minnesota, 50% of all fires that occur in schools in the state of Minnesota are purposely set fires by children in the school system, and that's getting real scary. In 1994, 243 of the 344 people arrested for arson were juveniles under the age of 14 here in Minnesota. Who are these kids? Well, we have several categories of kids that I'd like to talk about. First and foremost, we know that a big portion of the juvenile fire setter problem or fire play are kids between the ages of 3 and 7. And these are kids who have a natural curiosity about fire. And I would like to ask the question, if you're brave enough in this room, because people are always asking me, well, really, what do you think the extent of the real problem is? I'll ask it this way. How many of you, when you were growing up in your informative years, when your parents weren't around, or when you were with your sisters and brothers, or you were out with your friends, at any time either flicked the Bix or played with matches or did anything like that? I'll be the first to raise my hand on that. Okay?
Hey, Mary, when we were that age, they didn't have this.
They didn't have to. We were flicking the zip up.
Yeah.
Well, taking a look around, about 80% of this room raised their hands. And I don't think kids are getting any better than we were or have any better supervision. So I see this problem being exacerbated in the future. Kids have a natural curiosity of fire. Of the 4 elements, earth, wind, water, and fire, fire is the only element that does not have the educational attention that the other elements have. If you go into any of the stores that sell educational materials for children, you can find things about digging in the earth and little wind toys and things for playing in the water. But there is nothing really to teach kids about that element, fire. We know their parents did not get the information in school, or when they were in school, therefore the kids are not getting any information. So we have a large gap in our population where the fire information has not been handed down from generation to generation. Also, as we get farther and farther away from fire, you can't burn your leaves anymore, you can't burn the trash anymore, which we were kind of all raised on. As we get farther and farther away, people get farther and farther away from even having any idea of fire or fire behavior and how it affects them. And we'll be sharing some stories about that in a little bit. Curiosity kids, they set few fires. They're generally just playing or flicking or doing some small fires, but they're not going out purposely and setting a building on fire. They have a fascination from early on because if you think about it, what's the first thing we shove in front of a kid's face when they're 1 year old?
Birthday cake.
A birthday cake with what? A birthday candle. And what is our message to them? Hot, don't touch. Bad, no. Okay? So right away they've got this dancing flame there. They've seen somebody strike a match or a lighter. This comes to life for them, and we don't talk about it. Okay? That's the end of the education, and that continues on. So kids have this natural fascination with fire that we have to be aware of. Children, young children in this age group really do not understand the consequences of fire because most of the messages that they've been receiving up to this age is don't, don't, don't. There's no do messages in there. What do kids need to know? What do kids need to understand about fire? And that's one of the places that are seriously lacking. And at this age, kids are curious about everything in their environment. So what makes us think they're not going to be curious about fire at this age? And when a curiosity fire setter gets involved with fire play, they're more spontaneous in it. It wasn't something that they've been thinking about all day or all night or all afternoon. It's usually they find access to the fire materials, and that's when the fire play starts. So what this means is that we have an element here that needs to come into play when we're dealing with juvenile fire setters or child fire setters, and that is parents and community members. How often do you go to a restaurant or a gas station or a store or whatever, and you see the matches sitting right there within reach of young children? And you go to some of these places, they even have great big baskets full of matches. They're accessible to young children, and we think by just telling the message, don't touch, that's going to do it. Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't do it. We have to be more forthright in our efforts to keep matches and lighters away from children. And the people that can do that best are parents. If we think of all those kids that have been setting fires, they had to get the matches and lighters someplace. And the majority of those kids get their matches and lighters from home. Okay? So what do we have to do as parents, as community members? We have to get this information out. It's not simply enough to build in fire protection into buildings and make sure that we have good exits and make sure that we have firewalls and all those things built in to protect us. We also have to deal with behavior, because without affecting behavior, all this is not going to save these children from fire. So consider that in how you deal with that. I have a video I'd like to show you.
But at this time, that
Yes.
is not an arson fire, that's just incendiary.
We do not call it even incendiary. Okay? If you think about it, every fire out there is incendiary. People
Yeah, but you're not including the so-called arson statistics.
not in
at
the
this
arson
point.
statistics itself. This is going beyond the arson statistics because that's another big issue that we could spend a whole gazillion days on. We've just gone to show you the problem. Let me see if this works. This was taken off of a news station in Cleveland. Does anybody know how to work this?
I heard a click.
Here it comes. Wow, not too bad. This is quite graphic, and I have a story to tell you about this fire when it's done.
This is a story that we have just heard too often this year. Tanya, the problem is real and it is deadly, and it involves children playing with fire in homes with no smoke detectors. 9 children now have died in fires this year in Cleveland. In this case, like most of the others, a child was playing with fire and there were no smoke detectors in the home. Once again, we want to warn you that we are about to show you some very dramatic pictures of the attempts by firefighters to rescue the little boy and his brothers. Gallant effort you are seeing here by Cleveland firefighters, one of these little boys died at the hospital. Investigators believe 3-year-old Curtis Lyden was playing with a living room heater, stuffing paper in it. When help arrived, the fire, which claimed his life and hospitalized his brothers and mother, already had a good start.
When the first units arrived on the scene, the house was well involved with fire. There was fire coming out several of the windows.
I had everything up there and it's all gone. It's lost.
Keith Holsopple lived on the 2nd floor of the 2-family house. He was watching TV when he smelled smoke coming from downstairs.
We come downstairs and we couldn't go out the back door because there was flames coming out the back door and smoke. We just made it out the front door. At least we're alive. We made it out all right.
But tragically, little Curtis did not make it out all right. His 3 younger brothers, by the way, and his mother are all in the hospital. The boys, Tanya, are in critical condition. The mother, we're told, is stable with 2nd-degree burns. Deb, how old are the children? They range in age from about 3 months old to 2 and a half. As we said, Curtis was 3. He would have been 4 soon. The youngest boy is 4 months old. Thank you for the information, Deb. Thanks. As we have...
That all too often is the consequence of not having an informed group of caregivers to take care of kids, number 1, and number 2, not educating kids about fire. Now, what were these kids doing? Anybody recall what they said? Stuffing paper in the hot water heater, okay? Isn't that interesting? Yet we concentrate a lot of our efforts on matches and lighters, but kids are finding many, many ways to get that curiosity satisfied in their fire play activity. So always be aware of that when you're dealing with even your own kids. So curiosity is really the big portion of the problem that we have to deal with. But I also want to talk about a couple other areas that we have to be concerned about also. And that's what we call a crisis fire setter, and we don't have to put a label on it, but you know, for the sake of trying to define these kids, these are kids that get a little bit older in the ages of 5 to 10, and remember, 5 is still quite young. They set numerous fires. These are kids that sometimes the parents will call the fire department and say, I have a kid here who's setting fires repeatedly, you know, what should I do? And if there's no resources in that community, then that child goes uneducated and the parents do not get any help. And I would venture to guess that the majority of the fire departments and communities in the state of Minnesota do not have access to the resources or the educational intervention to stop this type of fire play. Hence, my thinking that this is going to continue until we get that set up. A lot of times these kids are hyperactive or ADHD, but that's not necessarily the case. We're just seeing a high incident in this type of child. They're impulsive and they're destructive. They have difficulty getting along with other children. Sometimes they do other crimes such as stealing. They have temper tantrums, trouble in school, and a lot of times their fire setting is triggered by some kind of emotional event in the family. We don't know why kids choose to use fire, but we know they are doing that. And a lot of the times these kids are absolutely crying for help. They want the attention. They know if they set a fire, they get immediate attention and something happens, as opposed to doing other acting out behavior. So that's what we refer to as the crisis fire setter. The delinquent fire setter happens to be a child, and again, these are just averages, maybe about the age of 10 to 17 years old. They're the ones that start getting into the group activities, and they go away from their homes, and they knowingly set things on fire and getting involved with that. This is where some of the gang activity is coming in. There was a private investigator who got called into Minneapolis on some fires that they were having, and they served a search warrant on this particular property. And there was gang involvement here, and when they went in there, they saw a great big box of photos, Polaroid photos, where this gang, in order to be part of the gang, you had to have yourself photographed setting fire to a vehicle in our very own state, okay? A lot of times if they're caught, the charges may be a misdemeanor or a felony, and the majority of the time, it's not enough usually get away. Now, when we talk about fire setters, a lot of times people think in these terms: the psychological or pathological fire setter. And they could be typically 8 to 10 years old, but they could be older. Trust me, this is such a small portion of the problem. Don't get hooked up in thinking that these kids, that the majority of them are in this category, because very, very few are. They set many fires, they have chronic problems, sometimes they're physically or psychologically abused. They target other people's property. We had a case in a small community not far from town here where I got a call. They didn't have a local resource in the fire department, and they said, we have a 4-year-old who set his brother's bed on fire, went right into the bedroom and purposely set his brother's bed on fire. This was a home where 4 different families were living, 19 people present in a 3-bedroom house. Now, this child had some severe problems, that whole family had some severe problems, and we were able to get him some help. These people get into the ritualistic type fires, and a lot of times they're severely dysfunctional. Again, this is only a very, very small part of the problem, yet people think in terms of pyromania. It must be pyromania. Well, that's just a small part of the problem. We are working in the State Fire Marshal's office with the Attorney General's office to find solutions to some of these problems. And we have a laundry list that we developed with the help of some experts in the field from the St. Paul Fire Department, Paula Peterson, and from the Lane Mountain to Spring Lake Park Fire Department as well. These are some of the solutions that need to take place if we're going to stop this problem from happening. Number one, there needs to be collaboration. Collaboration by more than just the fire service. It's going to take parents, it's going to take law enforcement, social services, mental health people, the school systems, everybody working together. People like you sitting in this room need to become a part of this effort to stop what's happening in your community. We need to take a look at the big picture, not just what's happening in my community, but what's happening in the surrounding communities, because we also have a group of people that are very mobile, okay? If they're having problems in a particular community with their child, rather than face the music, a lot of times they're picking up and they're moving to another community. And I can attest that this happens because I get a call from Fire Department A and then I get a call from Fire Department B. About 6 months later, they're describing the exact same child, same family situations and everything, so we know that's happening. We need to develop fire safety values in early ages, and that means starting at very, very young age in preschool with kids that are 2, 3, 4, and 5 years old. Start teaching them fire safety up front. If we can put in a positive value about fire in the early age, they're not going to be reverting to that kind of behavior later. We want them to value and understand fire. School-based education programs, early intervention, starting in preschool, going all the way up through high school. And it's not something that you should just learn when you're in elementary school. It's something that needs to stay with you forever. And based on the fire problem that we have in the state of Minnesota and some of the crazy things that people are doing to cause fires and that hurt themselves and harm their families, we really have a gap in the educational process. We have identified a program that we could have in the schools in the state of Minnesota that will be implemented next year. It's coming out of the National Fire Protection Association. That is all-encompassing injury control curriculum that starts in preschool and goes through the 8th grade. And we're looking at that seriously to see if we can get some effort and momentum going so that we can start saving our kids, not only from fire, but develop this early intervention and this value about safety in general, okay? And these are our workers of the future also. And you all know the problem sometimes we have at work with people getting injured and hurt and stuff. We want to build in this value early on. Parental responsibility. It's very, very difficult when somebody loses a child to lay blame back on the parent. But maybe at some point in time, we really need to start talking about that issue. We had a fire in the state of Minnesota in Moorhead, if you recall, about 1996, I believe, in January, where 6 people lost their lives. It was a mother and her 5 children in Moorhead. And the community's heart was broken. I mean, it was a horrible thing for the state to suffer. And when we went on the scene, and it's required now in the state of Minnesota to do autopsies on every fire death that occurs, when we did an autopsy and found that the mother's blood alcohol was 0.30, and we reported that to the media. We took some hits for that, but when we reported that to the media, it was a whole different attitude on the part of the community. It was no longer this, well, I guess there's nothing we could have done, it was an accident, it was just a horrible thing that happened. No, fires happen, kids die, parents die because of lack of knowledge, carelessness, and apathy. So parent responsibility really needs to work into this equation. Fire center programs must be in every community. We have identified through the Attorney General's task force the need for juvenile fire center interventionists to work at the state level to go in and assist every county in the state of Minnesota with setting up a mechanism that Marilyn's going to be talking about shortly to deal with the issues relating to fire centers. And she has a model program that they were able to develop. And we need to commit resources necessary to solve this problem. If we don't do it here, starting in this room today, this will never happen because it's going to take each and every one of us. If we take the word life, L-I-F-E, and we take a look at the middle word in life, that word is if we don't start with each and every one of us here to do something about this and step up to the plate and say, I'm going to go beyond just the fire protection features of the building. I want to protect my children, my community, my town from the behaviors that are happening because of lack of knowledge. And these 10 two-letter magic words need to come into play. Simply this: if it is to be, it is up to me. And it's me and you and you and you and you, all of us. It starts with you and your commitment. Now, I'm going to have Marilyn come up here and start talking about the model program that they put together in the city of Maple Grove, and you will get a sense of how you can help in your own community. You can help on the state level. No matter how big or how small your commitment to this is, we can always use your help. So I'd like to invite Marilyn up to talk about how that can happen.
First of all, I would like to just talk for a minute about my title that you all saw in the minutes. There's people that I've known in this room for years that didn't know that I was a commissioner, so I'll just take a minute to explain that. Several years ago, I was working with our city attorney and our insurance agent with the city, and we were defining a little bit more of our program. Our program started in 1988, the Juvenile Intervention Program in Maple Grove, and over the years it grew and changed, and we revised things, and at this particular meeting we were discussing some issues, and it was either, I don't even recall, but it was either the insurance agent or the city attorney said, by the way, what do you call these people that work with these families and kids? And I said, well, gee, I don't know, we don't call them anything. I mean, they're firefighters and they help families and they do intervention. And so we kicked around. He thought it would be important. He thought people should have titles, and our program is a pretty formal program. And so he decided, after we kicked around a bunch of titles, he came up with commissioner. And so all of the people in our program that do intervention with families are called fire intervention commissioners. And our program is a juvenile, it's a really long name. Juvenile Fire Centers Intervention Commission. And that's where the commission came from on the minutes. You can't believe the phone calls I got, Mrs. Commissioner. So anyway, I just thought I would take a minute to explain that. It's a pretty big word, but the people that do this are extremely dedicated people. They're firefighters, they're full-time staff, The full-time staff doesn't spend a lot of time, but they're there and they fill in when we really need it. And we also have community volunteers, and Phil pointed out tonight that he is one of our community volunteers. I encourage you and challenge you to check with your fire departments in your cities where you live and find out if you even have an intervention program in your city fire department or in your city if it's not in the fire department. And find out who's doing those programs. Community volunteers work, they're dedicated people. Phil, how much money do you get paid?
For the program?
Yeah.
Nothing. You guys feed me for free?
I give them supper. I feed him.
Give me a pager, entertainment, lots of knowledge, lots of education. I mean, it's a lot of, I believe, taking on my part. I don't think I'm giving as much as I'm taking from the program.
I knew he'd say that, because every one of the people in our program feel that way. They're all, I mean, they're very dedicated. Our community volunteers don't get paid anything. They truly don't, and I always feel really guilty about that. I always feel like, gosh, I wish we could do more, for them. All our commissioners carry digital alphanumeric pagers, and that's so that when we get a call for a family that needs intervention, we just send out a page. We have 18 commissioners. Right now, 2 of them are community volunteers, and we'll be putting on a 3rd one within the next 2 weeks. Our community volunteers are handpicked. We do police background checks. All our firefighters automatically get police background checks. But it's easy. It doesn't cost a lot of money to have a program. So I challenge you, check with your fire department and find out what they're doing, because it's a really important thing that you really need in every fire department. To take that one step further, not only do we need to have intervention programs in fire departments, but it's just not the fire department that needs to take care of this problem. It's not just a fire department problem. Let me just find this. Come on. There we go. I hate these things. I'm really bad. There we go. You should see me when I have to teach a whole class. I'm busy. Communities are not, the whole community needs to be involved with the fire department. The fire department is where people go to. That's their first response. When there's a fire setter, kids playing with fire, they call the fire department. In most cases, that's initially where they think to go. And so the fire department is the hub of it. But the whole community has to be involved, because if it's going to be a successful program, and if you're going to have success with kids, all of these people up here that are listed need to be involved. I'll explain it. In our program, when we started our program, the kids that came into our program were from parents calling and saying, I have a kid that's 5 years old, 8 years old, and they're playing with fire. And sometimes parents would be scared to death, and sometimes the kids were just starting to experience with fire. And they wanted to get some help for their kids. And so those were the kids that were coming into our programs. Occasionally, we'd have a kid that we found through a fire, when we actually went to a fire call, and we discovered juveniles that set the fire, and then they'd be brought into the program. And so it was pretty small numbers back then in the 1980s. We started working closer with our police department, law enforcement, and lo and behold, it was amazing to find out that the cops are out there on the streets, and they were finding out, I mean, they were running into fire setters all the time. They would get a call that some kids were playing and throwing gasoline on a driveway and lighting it on fire. The fire department would never get called out, but the police department would be notified because the fire would be out or whatever. And so the police department, and they go to these kind of calls all the time. You would just be shocked at the number of calls. We get most of our referrals now through our police department. All our police officers are all trained. They all understand what the fire intervention program is. They refer kids to our program. It's still a voluntary program. If kids get charged, if there's monetary damage, we charge kids. With arson, sometimes they're mandated to come back into our program through the court system. But the police department will talk to the parents, tell them about our program, and if the kid doesn't have any kind of prior criminal history or have lots of problems, if the family's real dysfunctional, then they probably wouldn't be a good candidate for the program. But they'll make a deal with the family. You know, the kid's 12 years old, we could charge him with negligent fire. but we have a fire intervention program. It's an educational intervention program. It's a great program, and we think that your family can benefit from it. So rather than charging your son or your daughter, we'd like to see you go through this program. It's been working just great for us. We get tons and tons of referrals, and it's been very successful for us. We're getting those kids, we're getting lots of delinquent fire starters. We're a veteran community with tons and tons of kids. And we see a lot of older kids, the middle-aged kids, or middle teens, that, are out with groups, and there's a lot of peer pressure and following, and we see a lot of that in my community. In the 80s, back in the 80s, we saw a lot more younger kids, but as our community has grown and we're getting more and more older kids, we're seeing in my community more of the older kids, and I would classify it as the delinquent fire setters. But through working with our police department, those kids are coming through our program, and we're having really good success with that. Other people, criminal justice, a lot of your county systems have diversion programs where kids will come into the court system, and rather than them going through court, they'll put them through a diversion program where they'll put them back out in the community into a program, like an intervention program. Social services, child protection agencies, your communities need to know who those people are and how you can help each other. Mental health agencies, very important, because you need to have people, if we have crisis fire setters that come into our program, so often those kids need to have a mental health professional counsel them to help them get through the crisis that got them there in the first place. So it's very important that we have contacts with the mental health community and people that have worked with juvenile fire setters and are familiar with the juvenile fire setting, so that they can make that connection there. Schools, again, years ago, I know we had small fires in our schools, and basically the schools kind of took care of it. You didn't hear a lot about it. Today, they know we have a program, and they'll call us, they'll let us know when there's a problem, and they'll get the family involved with us. And what's happening with that intervention is that it isn't continuing, and that's the important part of this, especially when you're dealing with delinquent fire setters. When we're talking about the older kids, you get them into the program, get them into the educational part of it, and we don't have the fire setting. It doesn't continue. So that's why it's so important. The fire service, I would question and challenge the fire departments in Minnesota. If you took 100 firefighters and asked them to tell you about juvenile fire setters and what they know about them, it's really sad to know that there's a lot of firefighters out there that aren't even aware of fire setting and all of the aspects that go with that. And so we need to educate our fire service, our firefighters too, within the fire service. And that was really a surprise to me when I would talk to some of our firefighters, and especially the older firefighters in our fire department, and they kind of had that same attitude that, well, it was a 10-year-old kid, and it was curiosity, and it's no big deal, and they'll just grow out of it. And so there's firefighters out there that have that same kind of attitude or perception about kids, and so we have to make sure that we're educating them too. Churches, hospitals, the network is really important. It's not just the fire service, but it's got to be the whole community. Everybody has to be involved to make this work and to make it successful. One of the things that I'd like to share is just to give you an idea of one city in the state of Minnesota. These are some statistics for Maple Grove. They just go from 94, but as you can see in 94, we had 37 kids in our program. We had 26 kids that didn't participate. You have to remember that it's a voluntary program, and so you can't always get kids in the program. In 95, we had 29 kids that went through the program, 30 that did not. In 96, we had 31 kids in our program, 32 that were not in the program. And so far this year, we've had 25 kids in our program, with 6 of them that didn't participate.
What's the population of Maple Grove?
About 46,000. So that just kind of gives you an idea. Those are the statistics that we've been keeping, and that's changing. Starting next year, we'll be adding some more information to that. We'll be adding the motivation, the fire setting or fire play, whether it was curiosity or crisis or delinquency or whatever. So that'll be added. There'll be some other things that we'll be adding to our statistics. It just gives you an idea that's one city. And as Mary said, there's so many kids that we don't know about that never get reported to us, that we don't even know about. I mean, these are really, really small numbers.
Is there a reason that the schools apparently are pulling out of the program? And it looks like that in those statistics.
The school's pulling out?
They didn't know about the first year, participated year 2, year 3, nothing.
I'm looking for that.
Referrals.
Oh, referrals, okay.
It looks like somebody told them to put the brakes on, don't do it. Perhaps afraid of a lawsuit, I don't know.
When it says referrals made by the school, actually, I think that's just indicative of maybe just trends. Right, so far this year, we've had like 2 kids referred from the schools. We don't get a lot of kids referred from the schools, and I'm not sure why that year that it was that high. I don't remember, but this year we've already had 3 kids that have been referred to our program. And it's just a matter of educating those people, letting them know that you have programs. And so I don't expect that would ever be real high. Some of those referrals probably could have been that the school told the parents about the program, so the parents called in and got their kids into programs through the school, but the school wasn't actually the referral mechanism too.
I think that's a part of it, Marilyn, is that the schools are feeling now that's really not their responsibility, especially if they feel it's, a family matter rather than the school district's,
I know years ago when I
responsibility
first started
problem.
talking to principals in schools about our program and letting them know about the program, it was real hands-off. It was like, this is our business, we can't give you names, we can't do this. And schools are becoming much more community-oriented than they used to be. At least I'm finding that in my situation. And I think that's just a matter of education. I don't know why that is, if all schools are becoming more community oriented, but I know years ago, when you'd go to the schools with a program like this, it was, no, we don't want to be involved in that. It was everything was real confidential, and they just took care of things themselves. But that's changed a lot.
Is that one of the forces that keeps it voluntary?
It keeps what voluntary?
The participants voluntary.
Our system, that's just our system. We could charge every kid that's over 10 years old, if we have some kind of monetary damage, or if we have some type of fire that could be called a negligent fire, we could charge kids if they're over 10 years old. And we could make it a mandatory program. But we've chosen to stay as voluntary as we can, and by working very closely with our police department, we've been able to keep that and still get kids to go through the program and to continue in the program, and it's worked really well for us.
What happens to the juveniles that don't participate though? Is there any tracking? Do you know what happens to them?
We track those kids ourselves. Hannibal County doesn't have a tracking program. The only kids that Hannibal County Juvenile Justice tracks are kids that are actually charged. And so we track those kids ourselves, but that's the only tracking that's done. Hannibal County is working on a system right now. I'm guessing, what do you think, Mary, 2-3 years away at least before that'll happen?
I think also what plays in part in this is the fact that you mentioned in regards to some of the firefighters, in regards to some of the small fires, it's no big deal, they'll grow out of it, whatever. I think that's also the attitude of a lot of parents too.
Oh,
it's like, not my kid, it's just a harmless thing. My kid's not bad, he's not, not saying that he's a bad kid. He may have had a little bit lax in judgment, but a lot of the parents and some that I've noticed are a little bit of denial too, that none of us like to think that our children are capable of some of the things they are, but of course we've all been kids at one time or another too. And
years ago, I had a couple of kids that came into the program, and actually the mom called and was concerned about her kids, and it was a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they lived about 6 blocks from a lake. And these kids were taking lighter fluid and going down to the lake and taking their toys with them, putting lighter fluid. Now, I mean, we're talking little. I mean, they weren't even, the one was in kindergarten and was home in the morning and went to kindergarten in the afternoon. They were taking lighter fluid, going down to the lake and taking their toys with, and putting lighter fluid on the toys and lighting them on fire. And the dad told me, they're just kids, they'll grow out of it. It's no big deal. Everybody plays with fire, everybody. And that was the dad's attitude. It took a long time, and it was a long road, but I think we finally convinced them that it wasn't. But those are just some examples, and I mean, we're talking some really dangerous activity, and that was the parents' reaction.
The inner cities have intervention programs like this?
When you talk about inner city, Steve is here, Steve Zaccardi is here from St. Paul, and they have a wonderful program. Minneapolis does not. They used to. Gordy's here from Minneapolis, and Minneapolis no longer has a program. They did have one.
And again, that comes back to a resource issue. When it came push to shove, and they had some budget problems in the city of Minneapolis 3 years ago, the thing that went first, like always goes first, is all their educational activities. And they had 2 of the premier public educators in the state working for the Minneapolis Fire Department. They set up the juvenile diversion program. They got the court systems involved. They had it really going for them. They had mental health help and everything. And with one swash of the pen, that program was completely cut out, and it no longer exists. So Minneapolis is operating with no resources right now for this problem in the last 2.5 or 3 years, Gordy. I can't remember how long it's been. So that's part of the issues that we have to deal with out there when you as a community member are faced with budgets cut and things that are going to happen. You got to make some choices yourself and let the rest of the world know what's important and what's not.
I also brought with tonight, for many of you that aren't familiar with what an intervention program is, I brought along some guidelines. This is something that we use in Maple Grove, and it's guidelines for our program. And when you read through this, I'm not going to go through this, but it's something you can take with you. It gives you an idea of what an intervention program is and what we do in an intervention program. So I just pass those around. If you have an interest, you can take one of those with you. I guess I'd just like to share a couple more case histories to give you an idea of some of the kids that have gone through our program. I already told you about the 2 little boys that went down to the lake. By the way, Mom worked nights, so she slept during the day. I just had a little boy come into our program. In fact, today, this afternoon, I got a call about 4 o'clock this afternoon. We have a 5-year-old little boy that lives with Dad and stepmom. They're divorced. Dad's divorced. He has custody of this little boy who's 5 years old, and he goes up 2 weekends a month to go to his mom's house up in northern Minnesota. And this last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, the little boy was staying with the mom, and she lives with her parents, and he went into the bathroom. He went downstairs, got some matches, and went into the bathroom upstairs, lit the shower curtain on fire, watched it go for a little bit, walked outside in the hall, closed the door, and stood there. And when the smoke detector went off, the mom and the parents left the house and called the fire department, and the little boy was still in the house. The mom called the dad, the divorced dad, and said, come and get this kid. This is 3 hours after the fire. Come and get this kid. He's trying to burn our house down. And when the dad got there to pick up the little boy, he was very, very proud of himself that he lit this fire. And can I go home now? Dad, you're here. Can I go home now? The fire chief, or the fire marshal from that city called me, and I've talked to him about this. And the little boy, the mom had promised to take the little boy to a Halloween party, or a haunted house on Friday night, and she decided she wasn't going to take him. The next morning, he tried to wake Mom up, and she didn't want to get up and didn't want to be bothered. And then there was one other incident, I don't recall what that was, but the little boy got mad, and he told the dad this on the way home, back to Maple Grove, where he lives. And he told him that he was mad at the mom, and that's why he lit the shower curtain on fire. But something that's even more interesting is that That little boy was standing at the bathroom door, and the bathroom door was closed, and we had a fully involved bathroom fire going here. Totally gutted the bathroom, and the smoke came out throughout, under the door and everything to make the smoke detector go out in the hallway. The fire department got there, and the mom and the grandma and grandpa are standing out in the front yard, and the little boy is upstairs in the hallway. So the fire department went in, took the little boy, and took him outside, put him outside with the mom and the grandma and grandpa. That little boy went back into the house 3 more times while they were fighting that fire, that bathroom fire. 3 more times he went back into that fire, into the house. And the parents and the grandma and grandpa were there. Now we're talking, this little boy was also abandoned. Mom left, just took off and left. He didn't see his mom he saw him like twice in a couple of years. He moved around a little bit. They've moved around several times. We're talking, I mean, if you're seeing where I'm going with this, we're talking about a crisis fire center. I've seen so many of those over the years. I had a little boy that was 6 years old that lit his bedroom on fire. He had just lost his grandpa. His mom was getting divorced. His older brother, who was like 10 years old, was a repetitive fire setter and set fires in the house all the time. So he had been taught really well how to do this. This little boy he was just going through, I mean, there was lots and lots of turmoil going on in his life. And we got him into mental health counseling, and he's doing really well. We see a lot of those kids. It's really scary how many we see of them. And if the fire departments out there don't have intervention programs, these families don't have any place to turn to. And so it's so important that these programs exist out there. So I encourage you, I challenge you, go back to where you live and find out if your fire departments have one, because it's really important. Any questions?
I was going to say, now that you've got your program in Maple Grove, I'm sure some of the neighboring communities are aware of it. Do people from there at times call you, or are you strictly say, I'm sorry, there can only be with Maple Grove kids?
It breaks my heart. Yeah, I get calls all the time from neighboring communities. And some of our neighboring communities do have programs, but there's a lot of them that don't also. And we get calls all the time, and our city attorney will not allow us to take anyone into a program that is not a Maple Grove resident. And so that's the only kids that we can have in our program, and it's really hard to turn people away. But there are some fire departments out there that have a little bit, the standards are different in their communities, and their cities will allow them to take other kids. So there are communities out there that we're able to actually, get these families to go to other communities. We also have a Washburn Child Guidance Center, which is located in Maple Grove and in Minneapolis, and Ruth Hornstein is the director of that, and works with juveniles all the time, fire setters and kids with fire play. And we also will send refer a lot of those kids to her program. So there are some out there, but if somebody calls the fire department and is turned down, they may not make another call. They might not try another community.
And that's unfortunate.
Is your program, Marilyn, a start program? Get somebody started in the right path, or do you see this child through until he or she is healed, or whatever you call it?
First of all, it depends upon the motivation for fire setting. If we're working with a curiosity fire setter or delinquency, or if we're dealing with a crisis fire setter. Generally, when a child comes into our program, we do an assessment, and we use an assessment that's from the United States Fire Administration. It's used all over the United States. It's an interview tool. We interview the child, the parent fills out a questionnaire, and with that, it helps us to determine the motivation for fire setting. We do that at the first session, and then once we determine motivation, if it's curiosity, we'll pre-test the kid to find out what they know about fire safety. We show them some fire safety films. We do worksheets with them. We send home family-oriented assignments for the family to do together at home. They come back. Generally, curiosity fire setters, the minimum they'll go through our program is 3 sessions. They'll come at least 3 times into our program. And then we continue to monitor them too. And depending upon the kids, we've had kids that, they'll be there for 12 sessions or 9 sessions. And some kids, crisis fire setters, we may do educational intervention, but they also will be referred for mental health, and they'll also be going to counseling. We have a 15-year-old boy in our program right now that's in counseling, but he's continued to come through our intervention program, and this kid loves bombs. And he was, I couldn't believe the police department referred him to our program. I was pretty upset about it. But he likes to take aerosol cans, and he would tape a lighter to them, and he'd light the lighter, and he'd tape the lighter so that it would continue burning, and he'd set it out in the yard so that it would explode. And this kid he just loves the bang of it, and he's a real risk taker. His dad just died a year ago. He's had lots of problems. He's moved from community to community to community. His mom just got a boyfriend. The mom seems, it's not a real abnormal family. The mom is very concerned. She's very cooperative. She wants to help this kid. She's had the kid in counseling. We just got him into a new counseling program, but he's continuing to go through the educational intervention. So he comes every other week and meets with the commissioners. And when they continue to give him assignments, testing them, and just teaching them about fire safety and talking to them about those kind of, it's just educational intervention is all that we're doing. We aren't counselors. But some kids will continue to go through the program. Some may just go to mental health, and we won't see them anymore, depending upon what they tell us.
What's really interesting, we had a case referred to the state fire marshal's office. It was a judge who had a young boy who was doing bombs, and they wanted to give this child some community service or an assignment, and they called me up and said, where can we send this kid to learn about bombs? And because we're going to require him to come back to the 9th grade class and teach the other kids about bombs and the dangers of bombs. And I'm saying that's absolutely the worst approach that you can do. If we have the child light 200 matches in the bathtub, everything's going to be fine. But what we find on the state level, and I'm only one part-time resource, is that people want to fix this with a video. Do you have a video I can show these kids? It's not going to be fixed by a video, okay? This is something that takes some care and feeding. And if you recall about a year ago, in Isanti, Minnesota, I believe it was, there was a young 7-year-old girl that was burned severely. And the cause of this fire was she was outside playing in the snow and with some other little friends, and it was cold and they wanted to get warm, so they were going to start a bonfire. Well, they couldn't get the wood started, so they went and got gasoline and they poured it on there, and as she's carrying this, it's sloshing on herself, and when she went to strike the match, she was a ball of flame. Now, the issue here that I'm trying to address is, where do kids see this type of behavior role models? This isn't something that just all of a sudden occurs to a child, I'll get gasoline and put on the fire. They had to have seen somebody do that. In another case, in a local city, 2 kids were playing with bottle rockets. Fireworks are totally illegal in the state of Minnesota. You can't sell them, you can't use them, you can't store them, you can't advertise, you can't do anything with them. 2 kids were playing with bottle rockets in an alley. The bottle rocket went askew, went into the window of an 83-year-old woman's apartment, burned her, and did $30,000 worth of damage to that house. In another case, Donaldson's Thanksgiving Day, 1982. Everybody should remember that. The largest fire in a B2 type occupancy in the nation at that time. 2 13-year-olds playing in the construction debris, kids that had a history of criminal activity and fire play, no intervention. If no intervention exists, then these kids will continue the behavior and go on a lot of times to bigger and even worse crimes. And now that we're dealing with the corrections industry, we were asking them when they do intakes for correctional facilities that they start asking the question if these children had any fire play in their background and if anybody ever talked to them about it. And it'll be really interesting to find that out, because on a national level, when they went into the state prisons and they did a survey, that 95% of those inmates who are in for felony crimes had fire play in their background as children. I'm not saying that's a sole indicator, because they probably all ate peas as well. But I'm saying is this is one of those instances where we have the opportunity to step up to the plate, get the proper people involved, and try to help these families and send them on their road to success. When we're talking mental health intervention, we're talking about a family probably that's in crisis, and although the fire play is what gets them in, when we get them in through this system, it takes care of a lot of other issues going on in the family. And that's why this is so critical, because those children are using fire as their means to get attention. And I'll give you an example in St. Louis Park about 3 or 4 years ago, where a 14-year-old was finally taken out of her home And she had been abused and sexually abused for about 9 years of her life, and she'd been tied to the rafters in the basement every day when she got home from school, and was punished and threatened if she told anybody. And she says, I set fires in the schools and I pulled fire alarms because I heard that if you did that, the FBI would come in and they'd put you in jail and somebody would finally take me away from this situation. Well, nothing ever happened. Okay, it never went anyplace. So we have to be cognizant. Some of the stories that Marilyn's telling you, some of the stories that we can relate to, and we can go on here all night with just stories about these failures that are happening out there. If we don't start doing something today, this is going to continue, and we need your help.
You mentioned that 84% of the arrests were male. Does that statistic also hold for the, say, the younger, say 5 and under or 7 and under?
What's your experience, Marilyn? Mainly males, or you
I
see
would,
more girls?
our program is mainly males that we see. It's real rare that we have girls in our program, females in our program, and age doesn't make a matter, at least in our
So
program.
it stays the same percentage from, is there any particular reason for that has been advanced?
Yeah, because males are risk takers more so than females. And it's just the nature of the, I was going to say beast, but it's the nature of And if you have ever gotten into any of Deborah Tynan's books or issues about how men and women relate differently, she has a whole series called 9 to 5, and the difference is in relationships in men and women in an office setting, and she goes back and she films kids early on, and that stuff is learned early on, the aggressive behavior, the use of more risk-taking behavior in young boys, and that's just part of growing up.
I think you're going to see maybe a little different trend, as in the past the boys were always encouraged to act out their emotions and their aggressions and everything else and be more assertive, to whereas nowadays little girls are being taught to be more assertive and a little bit more aggressive too. And I think with that you're going to see maybe a little bit of a skew in the statistics as years come by here.
That's true also.
That doubles the numbers.
Yeah, well, and speaking of that, I'd like to end with just this one slide, and it's in your slides, but I can find it. It has to do with the population on the back and my concern with what's going to happen in the future. Hopefully I've got it. If I don't, we'll just, here, I'll put this up. This is some statistics that I've gathered relating to the population and how fast we're growing. And if we think we've got a problem today based on the population that we have in this country, which, and this world for that matter, the rate of the population increase by the year, the 2040s, we'll have almost 10 billion people in the world, and I don't think that kids are going to get that much better, and if we're dumping that many more problems into the system, if we don't get a handle on this today, then in the future this is going to grow and it's going to be a bigger problem. Okay? Our role is really not to pin the responsibility of this issue on kids. Our role in dealing with juvenile fire setters in a proactive way by establishing early values and doing educational intervention at the front, we believe we can make a significant difference in a child even thinking of taking up a match or a lighter or engaging in any type of fire behavior. Because at the age of 3, about after that age, if you get too much higher, their values are already set, their behaviors, they've already witnessed things, and it's going to be hard to unteach behavior. If you do it up front, it's much easier.
I'm sorry.
Pete, and then
Okay. In light of the fire in Brooklyn Center last week, they killed the 4 Laotians. I heard from the fire service that there was a working smoke detector, but I also heard the comment from the fire service that the grandfather probably wouldn't have known what that smoke detector meant. And it got me thinking about the increase in the ethnic cultures, and is there any programs, or are there any programs at the state level that will help the communities educate these ethnic cultures on fire safety?
No, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there was a study done in Minneapolis along with the University of Minnesota where they went into these other cultures as they were moving in, the Southeast Asian, the Asian Pacific people. They discovered that 95% of these people had smoke detectors, but the majority of them did not know what they meant. They only knew that it was a law and it was required to be there. So there is a big gap in the knowledge level where they know it's supposed to be there, and if somebody comes with a badge or whatever, they don't know what to do if it goes off or what it's there for, and that's another gap, a hole.
We talked a little bit earlier about the movie industry, television.
I could go on for hours.
Everybody, I think, knows and pretty much has accepted the fact that a lot of the violence in the world is being caused by some of the shows. Any correlation to the, I mean, you watch any kind of an action movie, something burning or exploding. Any kind of, what impact does that have, I guess?
I can only give you from my beliefs that majority of the people in the population in the state of Minnesota, in your community, get more information about fire from TV than they ever do from anybody else. And what they're seeing is not real. And if you go back to the movie Backdraft and the detective movies, and every time they advertise something on TV, the screen explodes in fire. I mean, we've become so desensitized to fire as even a danger that we don't give it a second thought. And that's why I think some of the problems are happening, because kids and people don't realize the consequences. And I'll tell you a story that happened. This is not a story, this is a real event that happened on Saturday night in Eden Prairie. 25-year-old woman and her husband went to a Halloween party, and they were dressed in costumes. I don't know what she was supposed to be, a bunny or a cotton ball or what, but she took and glued cotton balls all over a set of long underwear so she came kind of fluffy. And as they were having snacks, there were candles on the table, she leaned over the table and ignited that costume, and the glue contributed to the fire. She tried to do stop, drop, and roll, and because we've been teaching stop, drop, and roll as though it's magically everybody's going to be healed, if you just do stop, drop, and roll, get on the ground, everything's going to be fine. The cold, hard reality is you will be burned. And what this woman did, she didn't feel it was stopping it. She was starting to hurt. She got up off that position where it would have made the big difference, and she started running, and they had to tackle her and get something around her to get her out. I just think that the lack of knowledge out there about fire, because of Hollywood and what that's brought to the equation, has totally skewed our ideas and thoughts about fire. And I have an entire program that I do on attitudes about fire.
With a lot of the statistics that you gave there, it seems to me that parents need to be more educated too.
I was talking to Jim about that.
Especially in the early years, when you don't necessarily think that they need to be educated, and parents just need to watch their kids more.
Right. Parents are our big issue, and I said to Jim, maybe it's not the kids we should be sending to school, it should be the parents. They need to go back and learn how to be parents, and that's one thing we don't teach them. And I really believe there needs to be a strong educational component in the school system that deals with all these injury areas and these potential problems that occur to people, including fire and poison and drowning and all those things, firearm safety as well, where you have a captive audience 5 days a week throughout the year, and messages can be repeated, because advertisers tell us in order for something to become instinctual that you have to hear or see something repeated 22 times. And they're saying if you're going to the market and you're going to buy a product, if you've seen that blue and red box 22 times, you will automatically go pick that off the shelf, and that's what we need to do, and that's why the schools are such an integral component here. We need to create that new fire-safe generation so that they can start educating their own children, and we can move on to other issues that are facing the world. I want to thank you for inviting us in to talk to you and share our ideas tonight, and we'll be around for a while if you have any other questions or concerns. Thank you.